All right, Siobhan, I think we're ready. I think we are ready.
Let's do it.
So for the 230 people that have jumped back into this space, when I give my classes, my history classes a break, I always thank them for coming back. So I'll say that. Thank you guys for coming back. I'm so excited about today in so many ways. We've been trying to recruit Mary Helen to come to this side of the country for a couple of years, and the fact we get her virtually is really exciting for us. On the next slide, I wanted to just acknowledge some great feedback and thinking in the last 24 hours, and I want to appreciate the openness. Before we begin today's session, we want to suggest a couple of things that will help us create a even more inclusive and equitable learning space, not only for us throughout the week, but also for our students and colleagues as we return to school. We would like to ask everyone to have their preferred pronouns visible next to your name. For example, you can see he and him for myself in this case. I know some of you have done this. It's also helpful to, some of your names themselves might not be accurate. I ran into that problem yesterday as well. But a link is provided here, and certainly some directions how to rename and use your pronouns as we continue to work to elevate our thinking in this space. So I'll give us just a moment to make that adjustment for those who would like to, as we get to know each other and get even more comfortable with each other this week. And then if we could shift to the next slide, I also want to address some good feedback we got, and it's a conversation. If you are a Twitter person, I really highly suggest everybody uses Twitter as to inform some of their thinking in terms of the ed spaces. I get so much out of it. All the translation groups talked about some norms yesterday, and this is a reminder that the norms we are using in our translation groups are meant to guide and assure a safe place for everyone to be able to bring their authentic selves, feel seen and heard. These norms should never be used to silence anyone. A suggestion, if you intend to use these norms in your classes or school or your programs, is to create an opportunity for co-construction by asking if there are any additions or changes that need to be made for the group. We did adjust one of the norms just a bit. The assume positive intent and take responsibility for impact. We sort of adjusted that second half of that one a bit. And I know it's been a conversation in sort of the Twitter sphere and in anti-racism and anti-bias discussions over the last couple of months. And it's something we should all just continue to work on. So thank you for the feedback from those people who shared it. Really, really appreciate it. Moving on, next slide to get warmed up. As a reminder, we do have some new friends who registered and are joining us today. This is a week-long MBE deep dive into this transdisciplinary field of education research, neuroscience research, and psychological research. If you look at this list of promising areas or buckets, certainly Pedro yesterday covered a lot. Mary Helen will certainly pick up on many of these, especially she looks at emotion and cognition and so many else. So just a level set again of this MBE field that we are working in as school leaders, as teachers, as program developers, as professional learning deliverers. And just a couple more slides and I can pass the baton to Mary Helen. One more. I remind us of, this is both exciting research that's old as well as depressing to me. The Ebbinghaus curve reminds us that we've already forgotten a lot since yesterday if we have not used it. Thus the purpose of our translation groups and hopefully you taught somebody new at the dinner table or over an adult beverage last night about what you were learning yesterday. But we will keep trying to retrieve and use what we learn each day and build upon that and transfer that knowledge and experience into new contexts and new research buckets. It is why on the next slide, we are attempting to collect your thinking through our form. We are finding, though, that this needs to be mostly done asynchronously, just because it really can't handle 300 people jumping in at the same time. But it is truly the place and space for us to share. So when you get a breather, a break, or a moment, that forum will be open and ongoing all week to share, to tag your action steps that you want to take as an individual or collectively with your folks at your home school or program. And lastly, I think, reminder of the day. Thanks for everybody being so timely. We have a great deep dive presentation ahead of us. We will be followed by a nice long Q&A with the day's speaker. We will have a brain break as we always do, and head back into translation groups to really think about how to make what Mary Helen and all the deep dive presenters share with us actionable in our context with our kids. Knowing, as Pedro says, not everything works all the time. Some of the things work some of the time. So without further ado, I think I got my final truly introduction slide for Mary Helen. Maybe. Oh, no. Tweet. Please tweet. Liberally tweet. This is just a great way another way for us to collect your experiences and stories. And now I think I got my final slide. So this is as much a selfish moment as a sharing moment. Other than Bruce Springsteen, who I have certainly a music and a man crush on, in terms of academics who have influenced my thinking and the center's thinking, Dr. Mary Helen Immordino-Yang's work on emotion and cognition and her team's research has been so important to my thinking as a history teacher and to our CTTL team's collective thinking as a team. So to get her to present today is really exciting. There's no way I can do justice, so I'm not going to read your biography, Mary Helen. I'll let you introduce yourself in any way you want. But it is with great pleasure from the West Coast and USC, where my daughter's actually virtually starting this fall. I welcome Mary Helen to our deep dive week. Mary Helen, I'm passing it to you.
All right, thanks, Glenn. Well, thank you for that kind welcome. Yeah, I'm just going to take a quick look at all of you guys and introduce you before I put on my slides, because once I put on my slides, I'm not going to be able to see you anymore. All right, since Glenn didn't introduce me, I'll introduce myself. I'm Mary Helen. I'm a professor of education, psychology, and neuroscience at the University of Southern California. And I'm the director of a new institute, a university-wide institute that we're launching called CANDLE, which is the Center for Affective Neuroscience Development, Learning, and Education. I'm new to this Twitter stuff, but you can tweet us. I don't know quite how that works, but we're at Candle USC or something like that. Yeah, so please do. I'm also the mom of 2 teenagers who are all stuck at home with me for this COVID quarantine, but we're hanging in there. One of them starting college in the fall too, like Glenn's child. One's in high school. So I'm gonna shift to my slides right now because we're very tight on time. Let's see, share screen, and then we're gonna do that, share. All right, so I can't see you anymore, so if anybody needs anything, you need to tell Glenn in the chat. So I've titled today's talk, Teaching from a Distance and Learning on Your Own, because all of us are thrown into this pandemic situation that is really, really pushing us to rethink and to really reflect on what counts as learning, and what counts as an educational opportunity that's worth having in today's world. And this pandemic has hit us also at a time when there's a lot of social unrest, political divisiveness, racial tension, just so many ways in which society is kind of reckoning with itself, and we're figuring out what direction we want to go as a society and as a world. And education is absolutely central to our ability to think in ways that will facilitate us building the world that we want to live in. So I think, first of all, the work that you're doing right now has always been among the most essential work to society. And so I thank you for that. I also think it's among the most difficult work to do. It's like parenting, like there's just no instruction manual. And yet there are things that we can learn and skills that we can learn that really help us to do better. So just a little joke. I don't find that forgetting curve that Glenn is depressed by very depressing. I do in a way, but I think what we forget is the stuff that doesn't matter. So what really is important to think about as educators is how do we help people, including ourselves, really reframe our thinking and build a story inside our own minds about what we're learning, and not just try to remember factual information, which is the stuff you forget, because stories you don't forget. Stories are the meaning you make, and those, as we'll see neurologically, are much more integrated into the working of our brain. They become dispositions of mind that really shape the way in which we engage with future situations and information. So it's no longer about trying to recall what you know. It's about being an agentic, purposeful, skilled human being in the world. And those kinds of skills, when you integrate them into really meaningful causes and work, you don't forget. So I actually find that heartening that we don't use up too much space in our minds with random facts. We're instead story generators as people, and it's that internal meaning that we make that I think really is the most important thing for educators to be thinking about, especially now when our traditional structures of education are so profoundly disrupted. And so I'm just going to plunge right in here with our conversation about brain development and learning and teaching during this pandemic. I start, those of you who have seen me talk before, I do this a lot. I start with a painting by my colleague and friend Margaret Lazari. She's a professor at USC of Fine Arts. And, what I love about this painting as a place to kind of start this discussion is that, if you look in the middle of this painting, which in real life is like a 6 by 8 foot vibrant watercolor, in the middle are these white squiggly things, which, my kids kind of think look like clouds or waves, right? What they actually are is the white matter of one brave volunteer's brain, right? So we put this brave woman in the scanner, we took pictures of her brain, we stripped off the outside, all of the little cells that do the firing, the neurons, the cortex, right, that make up the cortex. We stripped them off the picture, not off the woman, just in case you're worried. And what's underneath is this massive interconnected network of literally billions of connections among tiny little microscopic hollow tubes of salt water that conduct electricity around the space of the head and at the end spit little chemicals across chasms to communicate with each other. And the ways in which those networks are organized is now turning out to be a major focus of neuroscience research, because what we're learning is that it seems to be the balance and interdependence and interrelatedness and coherence of the patterns of connectivity in these networks that's related strongly to individuals' abilities to think well in the world, to feel good in your life, to manage yourself and your relationships, and to build the kinds of complex meaning that actually enable you to act well in the world. And so what I love about this painting as a place to start the discussion this morning is that, Margaret hasn't painted this brain networks, in a bucket in the corner where we can all put on our special, scientist glasses and like study how the brain works, right? As if there were such a thing as a brain outside of a person, right? Outside of a person, outside of a body, outside of a world, which doesn't exist. At least not alive. Instead, she's painted this sort of semi-translucent connectivity of the brain that is organized for this woman by virtue of her evolutionary history, by virtue of her own personal and family history, and by virtue of the ways in which she has come to think and experience over time. And I mean that in the most active sense, the ability and activity that she's engaged in over time as she does the work of thinking and making meaning and engaging and acting in the world and with other people according to cultural and emotional feelings and ways of being. All of that is what's shaping the connectivity of this network and making this person herself. And what I love is that this isn't painted kind of, like I said, in a bucket where we can study it. She's painted this connectivity of the brain in the middle of a seascape of life. It's being floated back and forth and literally bolstered and held up by the water and the world around it. And it's being sloshed back and forth by the tides of the culture and the situations in which it finds itself. And little weeds poking up through the bottom, right? And the warm sunshine shining down from the top, and little red fish swimming by to represent the spontaneity of our creative ideas. And this is how I think about brain development. So often in education, we kind of think about ourselves as having a brain. The brain learns like this, right? As if there were a brain in the world, which doesn't exist. We have people in the world. We're people. And part of how we operate is via our biology. And our brains and our bodies are deeply interconnected with one another. And part of the work that they do is to create this emergent property that we call the mind. And so part of what education is about is providing young people and older people the opportunities to engage systematically in experiences that are likely to engage them in ways that they will grow their minds. And that's why, again, I don't mind so much this forgetting curve, because what it tells us is that we have a very smart system evolutionarily. We don't waste time and energy thinking about or remembering things that don't matter. We instead are storytellers inside our own minds. Our very consciousness is a kind of story we tell ourselves about who and where we are and when, and how the world around us works and who we are in it. And what this means for education is, I think, very profound, because it shifts us away from a way of thinking about education that's mainly focused on how do we get people to remember things, how do we get people to be able to do things, and instead shifts us into what kind of story, what kind of understanding, what kind of meaning is a person making? What kind of feelings is a person engaging with as they interact with this activity I've designed for them? Because it's those feelings and meaning and stories that will shape, literally we're finding, will shape over time the way in which their brain grows, which in turn is impacting their health, it's impacting their relationships, and it's quite directly setting them up to be able to think and act as adults in the world later. And so the ways in which we experience things, the ways in which we think, and the meaning we make seems to be the critical feature of whether an education is really impactful for young people, or whether it ends up to be things that we have to keep practicing until we don't forget them over time. That kind of like focus on memorizing, I think, is really misplaced, and that's becoming clear now more than ever. I mean, the important question is not what you can remember, but it's what's worth thinking about. What kinds of information, what kinds of stories are told and why and how. This is the essence of all of the big political strife that's happening right now in the world, whether it's climate change or COVID-19 or racism or the way we teach history. All of these things are basically about the stories they teach people to tell about how the world works and who I am in it. And what we really need to focus on as an education enterprise is facilitating young people, building the kinds of meaning that will enable them to be responsible, ethical, engaged, and purposeful, skilled adults into the future. The things we teach kids to do now, we have no idea if they're going to need those in the future. Our world and our workplace and our sort of affordances of technology are completely shifting what we need to know how to do. We can't decide for kids now what they're going to need to know 30 years from now in order to be a productive adult. What we can do is help them develop the dispositions of mind, the patterns of thinking, the patterns of noticing and actively engaging with information around you, that, you know, that kind of curiosity, that interest, that ethical sense, that sense of self and efficacy of self, that interrelatedness that really sets people up to be responsible citizens into the future. And that's what your job is. It's ever so much harder, actually, than helping people to remember stuff. And so, you know, just to take it back to where this all starts, this is a picture of my sister. I don't put pictures of myself in my slides. My sister and my little niece, Nina, who's like 3 3/4 pounds and 2 hours old in this picture. Somebody's not muted. I don't know if it's intentional. And you know, Nina was the smaller of a pair of twins who were born in an emergency C-section when both my sister and the babies were anesthetized under general anesthesia. So this is the first time that they've met each other. That Nina's met her mom, and my sister's met Nina when they're both awake. And there's so much to look at in this photograph. But the reason I put it up here is because, you know, this isn't even where it starts. It starts in our evolution. It starts in our epigenetics. It starts in our prenatal stage, right, where you're already in a social environment with your, you know, infants and fetuses can hear what's going on around them. They can feel the chemicals of, you know, of happiness and of other kinds of functioning and bonding that are happening in their biological mother, you know, and all of this comes together to set Nina up. And when she gets to the world, she comes to the world not as a kind of blank slate, but as an agent of engagement with cultural learning. That is the legacy of our evolution at this stage. What we've been learning from, like, the Human Genome Project, right, is that you know, when scientists tried in a major international effort to map out the genome of this human species. And in doing so, they thought that we would be able to know so much more about where disease comes from, how development happens, what goes wrong in certain situations where people can't learn well. All these kinds of, you know, prescriptions for what makes us us. And, you know, if you read the 2 Nature papers that were published about the Human Genome Project, the one at the beginning says, we're going to take on this amazing, you know, enterprise together to try to map the human genome so that we can really finally understand ourselves and where we come from and what makes health and sickness and disease and all these things. And then the next paper basically says, we're done already. It turns out that human beings have about as many genes as a goldfish. And we have fewer genes than a rice plant, right? Like a little plant that grows in the mud and makes rice grains. I mean, rice plants are probably totally amazing, right? But they don't do calculus. They don't invent technology. They don't fight wars. They don't have spirituality, right? Where does our propensity as a species come from to do these things? What we're realizing is that it's not in our genes to do these things. Instead, our genes have relaxed over time. We have less specification of what we're capable of doing. There are no genes for calculus and making war and relationships. What we have is a basic set of tendencies to engage with the world agentically and to learn from other people and to mimic and engage with them in relationships and to follow a set of kind of contingency plans in the genes that basically are triggered by the way we feel and the way we think. So if you feel like this in a relationship, then engage in this way, grow your brain and your body in these ways. Those are the kinds of instructions that are in our genome, not instructions for here's how to read, here's how to, do some kind of skill that we care about in education. What we have is basic sets of contingency plans saying like, if this is how you feel in your world, act like this, grow like this, build your brain like this. If this is how you feel and think in your world, do it this other way. And what that means is that the legacy of our evolution and of our intelligence as a species is that we've offloaded our skills and our development and even our biological instruction manual onto the way in which we interact with other people and the way in which we feel and think. That has profound implications for education, because it means that the experiences that young people have as they subjectively perceive them, not as you give them to them, but as they live them, are determining how their brain will grow and have important implications for what they're capable of in the future. That is a really important job, and it's far more important and not reducible to what can you remember, what do you know how to do. So just to give you a sense of what I mean, don't try to read this unless you're a kindergarten teacher. I'll read it for you, but this is just a little poem that my daughter wrote. It's a song, actually, but I won't sing it for you. For her baby brother, when she was in kindergarten, her brother was a little toddler, and her brother's name is Theodore. And you can see this picture. This is basically just a scan of a picture she made, right? Where there she is in her little dress with a little music stand there, and she's singing this song she wrote for her baby brother Theodore, whom she calls Teddy, and she says, "Oh, Teddy, we love you more than the whole earth size. As the earth spins every day, we love you as much as usual. But sometimes even more, as you make us proud and happy that you're you." So I have a simple question for you. Is this a song about this little girl's love for her baby brother? Or is this a song about her budding knowledge of planetary science? We learn by making sense of the world in the ways that we experience it. This little girl lives with a scientist and an engineer for parents, right? And she's been told about the fact that we're on this gigantic ball of dirt, flying around through space, spinning and going past this star that shines us. And as we spin around, the star shines on one side, and then we go around the back side where it's dark, and that's day and that's night. And she's trying to make sense of all this craziness, which sure doesn't look like that when you look at the world, doesn't feel round, right? And then she's got this baby brother whom she just loves and adores. And she's engaging with him and thinking like, I'm overwhelmed with the way I feel about my brother. How can I represent this to myself? How can I make a story out of this to myself? And then she realizes, oh, these two things are actually the same to me because they feel the same. They're mammoth in proportions. They're overwhelming in scope. They're these awesome realizations about the ongoing, enduring nature of something with huge power and magnitude, like the world we're on, or like my relationship with my brother. And in her mind, she linked them together and understands them in a new way now. This is learning. This is what real learning looks like. And now she's going off to Stanford this fall to study, science. She engaged in that scientific exploratory sort of trajectory as a young person via connecting it to the ways in which she feels as a person in a cultural world. Does that mean now that her, love of the natural sciences and her love of her brother are tied to each other? No, not anymore, because now she's become more and more able to build complete stories and satisfying narratives about how the world works that are sort of specialized. They're disciplinary knowledge now about the natural sciences, and they're separate from the ways in which she feels and thinks and interacts with her family and other people. But I would argue, and I think the neural data support, that the reason our learning and our understanding is such a powerful force in our own brain and evolutionary development is that it's hijacked the very same platforms in the brain that evolutionarily and now have the day job of managing our survival and digesting our lunch, right? And telling us when our hearts are pounding and when we're awake and when we're asleep and how awake to be given the importance of what's going on around you and the situation you find yourself in. And this is what I mean when I talk about emotion and cognition really being two dimensions of one thought process. It is not neurologically sensical to talk about emotions separate from cognition. It doesn't exist. And it's not sensical to talk about thought patterns and cognitions without emotions. They don't exist either. Why would they, right? Why would you spend energy and effort on thinking about things that don't matter? That's why storytelling and deep understanding and a person's own sense of experiential agency in the learning process is what actually drives learning. And so the big picture point here is that emotions might be
the DNA sequence, but instead they affect how cells read genes, period.
I'm sorry, somebody talking? I'm just going to keep going. Somebody talked, but I didn't hear it. Emotions may be automatic responses to situations. We automatically feel emotions when we recognize certain situations. So what that basically means, right, is that we have to cognize about the world. We have to notice things about the world and interpret them. Think about how much knowledge and experience you have to know how to do that, right? And then what education helps us to do, I would argue, is to learn how to feel about the things we notice, how to think about them, how to find them interesting or important, how to apply them in the world in a way that allows us to be creative and innovative, allows us to take a stand on the things we care about, allows us to try to build the world in the way we want to see it happen into the future. Think about how much cognitive capacity and emotional sort of drive it takes to grow young people who can envision the world that doesn't exist now and then can rally their academic skills to be able to make that world happen over time. That's what your job is. That is incredibly, incredibly difficult to do and incredibly important work. That's why it's so important that you guys come together around these deep dives like this and really think together about what your work actually looks like and how you might try to maintain that kind of deep experiential learning for your students and for yourselves, your people too, your learners too, and your relational sort of connectedness, which makes you physically, emotionally, and socially well, and allows you to try out new ideas with each other. All of that kind of innovative space of working together is really what makes the possibility of great teaching and learning. So I really thank you for that. I'm going to show you right now just a really short video clip from Nova. The episode called School of the Future is a 2-hour special that came out in, I think, 2016 or 17. And we were featured in there there's a short clip of that feature I'm going to play for you just so you have a sense of how I do my empirical work, because the work that I'm talking about, these things I'm talking about, are not just metaphor. They actually are what we're finding in the brain when we ask people, young people and people across a lifespan, but especially we focused on adolescents over the last couple of years, to really learn things that are meaningful to them, to think deeply about what stuff matters and why and what they know and who they are and what they want to do about it, right? In the MRI scanner and in interviews outside of the scanner, because we can use what we learn as young people are telling us about their thinking and their meaning and their struggles to remember what matters and to figure out what's important, right? And as they pull that together and make stories out of it, we can watch that happening when we put them in the scanner and ask them to think again about a series of stories, in this case, that we tell them about real, true stories around the world, and then ask them to make sense of that. So I'm going to play for you this short video so you get a sense of kind of what the lab looks like, what the neuroimaging protocols look like, and then I'll come back on and explain to you some of the things we've found. Hey, welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm Mary Helen. Nice to meet you.
Since her days as a teacher, University of Southern California neuroscientist Mary Helen Immordino-Yang has been interested in knowing how emotions factor into learning.
I quickly realized that there was Oops, I'm sorry. Curiosity, and how can we support that process?
In trying to identify which parts of the brain are involved in the deepest and most meaningful learning, Immordino-Yang works with teens from troubled neighborhoods.
We're going to be watching stories. We really want to know what you think, so there's no right or wrong answers. These are kids who see a lot of crime, they see a lot of dangerous things, they see a lot of poverty. And we wanted to understand, how do they make meaning of that world around them? This first one is a story about a girl who lives in Savat, Pakistan. And the city was being taken over and basically run by a group called the Taliban. So I want you to watch her when she was 12 years old.
First, she gets them emotionally engaged in a topic by showing them videos about people struggling to overcome adversity.
And I want to become a doctor.
So how does her story make you feel?
This story makes me feel upset how she wants to be a doctor and continue on with her education, but it makes her sad that knowing her journey would be very difficult.
For adolescents, these types of stories can trigger moments of deep reflection.
They come back from those kind of reflective moments with this heightened appreciation of the meaning of the story and what it applies to in their own life and what it means for the nature of the world more broadly.
And it's crazy how it's that powerful.
Whereas we've known that for a long time in education, the neural data are giving us new insights into the mechanics of that process.
Over here.
To find out which brain regions are harnessed during reflective emotion, Immordino-Yang monitors the students' brain activity as they re-watch the emotional videos in an fMRI scanner.
Hi, Estella, how you doing in there?
Good.
So we're looking at the movement of the blood flow in her brain as she's watching the stories, and where in her brain is becoming more and less active as she's experiencing these emotions.
She found that the reflective thinking caused by these emotional videos triggers widespread activity throughout the brain.
The most high-level brain states that people experience in the scanner don't just activate high-level systems, they also activate lower-level structures of the brain that are involved in regulating and monitoring your consciousness and your survival.
Immordino-Yang believes that the reason why learning and emotion seem so intimately connected is because complex emotion like admiration, can activate basic brain functions, like those regulating breathing and heart rate.
We think that the reason that humans' values and belief systems and ideals are such powerful motivators is literally that they're hooking themselves into biomechanical machinery that has evolved to keep us alive over time. So emotions are a critical piece of learning always. Meaningful learning, learning that really matters to you, that changes who you are and that endures over time, always has an emotional component.
So I would draw upon any of these.
Her research shows that engaging students on an emotional level makes for more powerful learning experiences.
So the big picture idea here is that what we're learning is just like Nina's little brother here is showing us, right? As he's looking at his mom taking this photo by, a reflection of his own self, right? Is that the emotions that we feel. So by that I mean what happens physiologically when you're aroused or when you're relaxed, and then you read that back in your brain, are the things that are steering the ways in which we think and construct awareness, our own consciousness at that moment. So feeling emotions actually turns out to involve brain systems that feel and regulate the body directly, especially the gut body and the internal viscera, like the feeling of your heart beating, the feeling of your intestines and your digestive tract are actually the physiological platform on which we think about information deeply. And when you think about that, you realize how much a person's experience of the learning process is what is key to whether or not they'll learn and remember, and to how well they will integrate the things they're learning. So that the forgetting curve isn't just about facts anymore, it's about stories that allow you to reconstruct your knowledge over time for yourself, so that that relearning and retesting effect actually becomes something you do for yourself habitually as you think over and reflect on information and develop dispositions for becoming a learner, and not just a factual sort of storage house like a file drawer, which isn't really how we develop knowledge that's useful in the world. And so to take you to the brain, we had many findings that we've now followed up on over time. And basically we can now tell, and this is the data that we're writing up right now, when we sit with adolescents like the young woman that was in that video clip, and we look at how she makes sense out of things, the ways in which she constructs meaning out of that story, and put her in the MRI scanner and ask her to think again about the story and tell us how she's feeling, given the brain activation patterns and the way in which she engages with the story in the interview, we can predict her brain development 2 years later. Not what stage of brain development she'll be at, but how much growth and in what way her brain is going to change from now until 2 years from now when she's 18 years old. That's an incredibly powerful statement about the power of thinking to grow one's brain. And in turn, we can predict from the ways in which the brain has grown how happy that person will be as an adult, how successful in school or work, how strong in their own sense of beliefs, how comfortable with themselves, how much they like themselves, and how happy they are in their close relationships. All of the outcomes that we really, really care about for our young people. And we can predict those by the ways young people make meaning. But just saying the words isn't enough. You need to also show us that you're doing the brain activity that actually reveals that you are constructing your own meaning out of what you've learned and not just trying to memorize what somebody else has told you. So when we look in the brain, we had a couple of important hypotheses. The first ones were these two pieces of tissue folded underneath called the insula. This is the forehead, this is the back of the head. And these pieces of tissue, we've known since 1950 in neurosurgery experiments with epilepsy patients that if you poke in there, the person vomits, or they get other kinds of gastromotoric distress, which I won't describe in polite company. These are visceral somatosensory cortex. This is the platform on which you feel your guts and viscera. If you run up the stairs quickly and you feel your heart pounding, this is where you feel it, over here. We wanted to know when people are thinking about things that they tell us in the moment are deeply meaningful to them and that we can then show they remember 5 years later, right? Do they actually activate these regions of the brain that are also sort of reading back the state of your internal guts? And then we also wanted to know down here, this is the brain stem, way below the level of conscious awareness of our control. It's the kind of bottleneck between the cortex up at the top and the spinal cord down here that goes out to your face and body to control your actions and then to sense what's happening and bring it back up to the brain. It's a densely packed little sort of stalk of nuclei and fiber tracts that are intricately arranged to transfer information up and down and to filter that information when needed and to manage consciousness, like as compared to coma or persistent vegetative state, right? I mean, like consciousness in the most basic sense, and to manage things like arousal, to wake yourself up so that you can think about something, literally spritzing up into the cortex chemicals that make the firing of neurons come alive so that you can think about things. And what we wanted to know was what's going on in those regions when people are thinking about things that they claim are deeply meaningful to them, and when they're constructing stories about those feelings and remembering it 5 years later. And what we found is that indeed, we have massive activations systematically across people in the anterior insula on both sides, right? Which tells us that people are playing out their learning process on the feeling of their guts. No wonder how you feel and whether you feel like you belong and whether you feel like your teacher actually thinks you're smart and can do it is so essential to whether you actually can think about things in a coherent way. And we have massive activations in specific brainstem regions all the way down into the medulla and the mesencephalon. These are regions of the brain and brainstem that if you get damage down here where my mouse is, right above the spinal cord, we literally cannot keep you alive on life support. Your physiology becomes completely dysregulated, your heart stops beating, you stop breathing, and you die very rapidly. And when people are thinking about things that they are 5 years later, according to our testing, going to be more likely to remember, because they say that the things are deeply interesting and meaningful to them, we see activation all the way down into the medulla, into brain regions that we share with alligators. Our learning and our ability to think are not separate from our ability to survive and be alive and well in the world. Our physiological functioning is this platform on which we make sense of things, and the ways in which we make sense of things is in turn shaping the way we're alive. We are learning beings. We are culturally interconnected, feeling people. And that is the essence of what teachers need to really harness and engage with for students to do meaningful learning that actually will shape their brain over time in ways that will enable them to be successful adults. So this is the brainstem, the anterior insula, and we found something else really essential, I think, for educators to understand. That is, we found these activations in regions deep inside the middle of the head, which are called the default mode network. And I've written a lot about this, so I can point you to resources about this. But what we knew about this network when we found it here is that only a few years before, my colleagues Marcus Rakel and others at Washington University St. Louis had decided to do a really clever experiment. They thought, we're using MRI imaging to study what happens in people's brains when we show them math problems or language or scary snakes or whatever it is, and then we watch how they react. What if we put people in the scanner and ask them to just relax, think about nothing, just rest in there, don't fall asleep? right? What would we discover about the brain's so-called default mode? And what they found was that, ironically, right, paradoxically, the brain's most expensive metabolic tissue, deep under this circle, these tissues use more energy and oxygen per unit area per unit time when you are daydreaming than your leg muscles, an equivalent sized piece of leg muscle in your thigh, uses when you're in the middle of running a marathon. These are incredibly metabolically expensive pieces of tissue. They were massively activated and talking to each other in coherent ways when people were doing nothing. Ours was among the first, or possibly the first, I think the first study that actually showed that there was a task we could ask people to do besides daydreaming that would activate these regions. What did we ask people to do? Think about how you feel. Think about information that is important to you, that matters to you and to who you are, that is emotionally moving to you, that's engaging to you. And what we found is that those regions were activated only for some of the stories that we told people to react to. Others of the stories there weren't. And let me just explain to you the difference between these stories. Glenn, I'm going to run till like 10 o'clock if that's okay, since we started a little later than I imagined. If you want me to stop, just tell me.
I don't think the audience is going to let me stop you. Though we have more questions that we could digest in a month. So.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of questions in here. This is some tricky stuff.
Not
Okay.
a problem. No. I think all of us are on the edge of our seats. At least I am.
Okay, great. Sorry about the little click to add text stuff. I can't get that out without in this view, without making it so I can't show video. So on the left here, you see a picture of a young person, right? There, I can do that for you. A picture of a young person painting her self-portrait. This is an 8-year-old painting her self-portrait. So just look at that for a moment and think about how you feel about what she's doing. Right? And then let's look at somebody else. This is a person walking down a road, right? And think about how you feel about her. And then I'll tell you something about her. So this woman on the right is actually in China. She's a Chinese physician. She was the #1 student in her class in Beijing in medical school, and she was offered a track of training that would have put her in charge of the entire university hospital system and made her incredibly prosperous as a physician and powerful. And as a medical school intern, at one point she rotated through work in rural China to do charity, where she went into one of the most rural parts of the Chinese mountainside to do medical care for people who don't have access to it otherwise. And the long and the short of it is, working in that incredibly impoverished, cut off place, she realized, and the villagers there helped her to realize, how absolutely essential medical care was to people who couldn't access it. And there's an amazing story that the villagers tell in the video that we show in our experiment, where they basically say she was leaving that night to go back to Beijing, and she was walking down the path back to the road where the bus could pick her up, and one of our people went into labor, and she was in danger of losing, her baby, and we didn't know what to do. And somebody ran down the road and got this woman. She missed the bus. She came back up. She was able to save both the mom and the baby. And at that point, she realized that she just could not leave, and that she was rededicating her life to working in the most rural, impoverished regions of her country and trying to advocate for medical care and clinical care in these settings. And she gave up an affluent, prestigious job in the city to live, as the villagers say, even poorer than they do. And so now when you look at these two people, how do you feel about them? And how do you know how you feel about them? These are two kinds of stories that we included in our experiment. One we call admiration for skill. You can look at that painting that girl is making and know how you should feel about her with only a little bit of cultural information about how darn difficult that is to do. Whereas the person on the right, you can't know how to feel about her until you know a whole lot about her story, about the world, and then you can imagine what it must have been like to be her. Even though I didn't tell you what it would feel like to be her, you can figure that out because you're smart adults who've lived in the world too and have experienced maybe some things kind of like that. What we showed in our experiment, and I think this is the reason that we won the best paper of the year from the National Academy of Sciences for this paper, was that those two kinds of emotional feeling states are reliant on different networks in those deep down default mode systems that are inside your head. And what we basically showed is that networks that are involved in the feeling of self, and I mean that in the most basic sense, your ability to be aware, to be conscious as compared to asleep, are actually activated differentially depending on the kind of emotional story you're telling self. And this has important implications for what you remember about the information. So what we found is that this region up here, which is actually sort of re-representing the arms and legs body, right? If you get a lesion in here, what you get is people who deny they own their left leg, right? The famous story of the guy who had a stroke who kept falling out of bed in the hospital, and they asked him why, and he said, well, I'm trying to stay in bed, but I have to push this dead leg that got left in my bed out so I can sleep. It's just disgusting. And then every time I do that, I end up on the floor, right? He did not know that he owned his own leg, right? That's what happens in here. And what we know from these data is that when we're reacting to how that girl is painting, right, or when we're reacting to somebody who gets injured in front of us, who feels physical pain, we're reacting on the substrate of our own physical embodied self. This is the nature of our here and now empathy. But there was a different kind of self that was activated for stories like The Doctor in China, where you cannot know how you should feel by looking at the person in the video directly. You need to know a whole lot about the world and her situation and what it must have felt like to have been her. And by the way, when people do this, they often turn it back on themselves afterward. And maybe you found yourself doing this, saying, my gosh, I should be more dedicated to the kids I'm working with. I should work harder to try to be a good person, right? We are just driven and inspired by such stories to better and examine our own lives. People don't say, oh, I wish I could paint like that. Or I wish, they might say that, but they don't go out and try to do it. Whereas with the Chinese people do report even years later when they run into me on campus, when they were in this experiment, I'm trying to be a better person, more like her. Right? That's the nature of this kind of inspired learning that transcends the content of the story. It's not about what you remember about this paintbrush or about the Chinese doctor and whether it was Beijing or Shanghai she was in. That's not what matters. What matters is what you learned about how she made decisions and dedicated her life. And what we found is that this area down lower in the brain, which literally is connected to those brainstem regions that I pointed out that are activated when people are learning, it's that area that was activated when people were reacting to the more complex inferential stories. And that area is also deeply involved, we now know, in remembering. So not remembering factual information, but remembering information that fits together into a big picture pattern that applies to the world. The kind of memories that really education should be about. That, it isn't just about like, what's the capital of, Uganda. You know where to find that because you have a story in your mind about what countries are and what capitals are and what Uganda is and what kinds of unrest has happened there that might have moved the capital city over time, right? And all of that, then you can go use Google in a smart way to get the answer that you might have forgotten. What I told you is that you only activate these regions when you're not engaged in here and now, looking into the world, moving your pencil on the paper, 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me, everybody repeat after me. This is how we do it, right? Or this is what we know. you can only build this kind of meaning when you actually disengage yourself. And we've actually shown in empirical studies, when we watch people move themselves into these inspired states that they claim are deeply powerful for them, and when they do that, they remember it 5 years later, unlike the other stories, right? When we watch people do that, they actually turn their eyes away. They close their eyes. They go like this. They roll them up, right? And you've seen people, you do that too, trying to remember something really like that's in your head. It's like, don't bug me with the information from out here. It doesn't matter what the world looks like around me right now. I'm searching inside my own mind for something that I can figure out. And what we showed, and what now many, many studies have shown, is that the ability to build that kind of memory and recall, which is the really powerful kind, is interfered with by task-oriented get this done here and now. And conversely, task-oriented here and now is enabling you to kind of apply what you think of in your mind to actually make the world a different place, or to do stuff, or to show what you know. And so what we show in the teenagers is that it's this ability to toggle between these two states effectively. Like the girl in the video says, and she knows that it's going to be really difficult, and then she has to, and it's really powerful. When she comes back and says it's really powerful, what she's saying is that I need to go inside my own mind. Don't make me move my pencil on the paper right now. Don't make me listen to you right now. I'm thinking about this and forming deep memories about it. And so to kind of pull us all together for education, what does this mean? This way that the brain organizes itself around storytelling and around sense of self and around deep meaning making and emotional feeling states. What does this mean for emotional well-being of our students, especially during this pandemic when people are physically separated from each other? And it's so difficult to ramp off of each other's and riff off of each other's meaning making in the way that you guys are doing now in a virtual platform. That's difficult for kids to do. And it's really difficult for you to support them in doing that as teachers. It's like super hard, right? What does it mean for how we use technology? When we have little things dinging and banging at us and saying like, ding, like play this little game, right? Whenever you're filling up your free time with stuff that's entertaining you, we know that the brain is built, that those floating networks, that painting of a seascape that I showed you at the beginning, are literally built by the way in which you use them. If we're using them in this outwardly directed recall, do it now, on the spot, 1, 2, 3, everybody start writing kind of thing, what's happening is that we are training the brain, potentially, to focus on feed me, do, as compared to I make bigger meaning that actually facilitates me becoming a different kind of thinker that remembers the information not as discrete facts that I can recall on cue, but that I can integrate together and synthesize into an understanding that I can apply in the future and that I can use as a basis to create new knowledge, to innovate, to be creative. And so thinking deeply is essentially telling complex stories to yourself. That is what you're aiming for as an educator, and it doesn't matter whether you're teaching math and the stories kids are telling themselves are how math equations work and how they apply and describe things in the world, how they measure things, they allow you to predict things, right? Or whether those stories are about art and what my painting is meant to express, or literature and what this character in this novel is experiencing and what she might do next because of that. Or history and the stories that we build out of the facts we learn about what happened before. All meaningful learning is essentially a storytelling process. And we construct those stories together, and they're deeply influenced by the way in which you feel as you engage with the content. And so emotions are fundamental to the learning process, but that doesn't mean that you need to be enjoying yourself all the time or having fun all the time or jumping around in an excited way. It means sometimes that deep learning can be a very sort of sobering, deep interest-driven, curious process in which people kind of settle in and think about, what does this mean that I do this? What does it mean to solve a math equation backwards and forwards? How can I relate those different kinds of operations to each other in a way that helps me really understand what this is useful for in the bigger world. And just to close quickly, I'll give you some examples, of things that kids have said in my lab that show this kind of switch, right? We ran a science summer camp for very, very low SES kids in LA. We basically put flyers around in the poorest parts of the city and, asked kids to write to us if they wanted to attend a neuroscience camp in the summer for 3 weeks that would be fully paid for by the NSF, the National Science Foundation. And we got kids from homeless shelters. We got kids from living on the street with, on their own. We got kids from all over the place to come in for 3 weeks every day and engage in discovering the neurobiology of emotion and how it shapes their thinking, right? It's kind of an exercise in empowerment, but also an exercise in science. And, just look at the ways that these very, very smart kids were talking about what science meant to them at the beginning and in a private interview. This is at the end. We asked them in an interview, tell us, what is a scientist to you? A scientist is, fill in the blank, right? Kids said things like, good at science and math, somebody who needs to be able to answer all questions and have the periodic table memorized and know everything about anything, is very efficient. It's all about speed. Right. A person who worked in labs all day taking info out of rats. A person with glasses that is skinny and they've been studying so hard that they don't have proper health and they're tired or weak looking. I always wonder why they want to be a scientist if that's what they think scientists are. But anyway, a nerd, thanks a lot, antisocial and did not like having much fun. 3 weeks later, even though we didn't talk about what's a scientist, all I did was do science with them. Have my own kids come in and serve the snack, right? Hey, watch me. I'm a professor of science and a mom. Get that, right? Watch me do it. They spontaneously built a new understanding. After camp, a scientist is someone who can walk into a subject blindfolded and explore and eventually become an expert, is constantly working with instruments, which may come with no set of instructions, but just persevering and sticking through it until it works out. Almost completely opposite of what I used to think, right? Hello, conceptual change, right? Not, I know something different now, but I think about this in a different way now, right? Not only do scientists not spend all day in a lab, but they're constantly engaged with other scientists and they collaborate their research, so it benefits them all. Very engaged, very open, cares about what others think and their ideas. Any person who's curious, right? It's not true that being curious makes you a scientist. You need a whole lot of knowledge and skills and factual information to be a real scientist. But boy, being curious is a way better starting point than wearing a white coat and being a nerd who doesn't like to have a lot of fun, right? Why? Because a curious person, that's a disposition of mind. That's an internal state of default mode being and of engaging with information that makes you a scientist. Whereas at the beginning, scientist was what you look like, what you do, what you're fast at, what you're able to do right now, what you can recall. You have the whole periodic table memorized. Bam, 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 can tell you what it is. That's not a scientist. A scientist is someone who has a particular disposition toward engaging with the world. Scientist is a kind of demeanor. They've shifted, I would argue, from that outwardly focused world to that inwardly focused meaning making. And that will engage them in effective learning. So to tie it together, high quality education accomplishes three main goals. And I've written about this with my colleague Doug Connect in an article for Ed Leadership, which I think I gave to you guys to read. It helps students learn to build the kinds of internal narratives and stories that reflect the content and the skills they're engaging with in school. What kinds of stories, what kinds of understandings, what kinds of inner relationships can you construct about math, about art, about history, about English, about Spanish, about social relationships? And it's not just about relevance in the sense that you can do what's relevant in your world right now. I teach you Shakespeare using rap music because you like rap music. No, I teach you Shakespeare because you have something much more fundamental in common with Shakespeare than you think. You're a human, and so was he, and he was amazing at showing how people's internal experiences of relationships shaped their decision-making and their behavior. Guess what? That's true for us now too. That's why we read Shakespeare. We can expand our horizons of what feels relevant by really engaging with the essence of what this is about in a deep way. And so high quality education helps students expand the range of topics and skills and ideas that they're capable of recruiting in the service of enriching and continually rethinking and re-envisioning these narratives. What new kinds of narratives can you tell yourself about the world that you couldn't before you took this class? That's what you should ask yourself of your students. And third, extremely important, but last and always in the service of numbers 1 and 2, it provides targeted, situated, differentiated support and instruction for acquiring the building block skills that are necessary for you to access information, for you to solve problems, for you to communicate your thinking with others. That you learn only because you're so driven to explain this mathematical story. Then you learn fractions in order to make that happen. And we talk about that in the article. So to close, emotions are automatic. You don't control directly your emotions. What you control is what you think about. And the thinking is what indirectly changes your emotion state, right? You calm yourself down by convincing yourself that you should be calm, not by saying, heart rate, stop beating right now. Blood pressure, I need you to lower, right? We can't do that. But what we have is an amazingly powerful mind. That mind, it works in the ways in which we make meaning and make stories. So just to sum up, I have resources that are freely available, also a book that I donate all the proceeds to educational causes. If you're interested in the biological stuff about epigenetics and the ways in which our relationships actually shape the way our genes behave and how we grow and become, you can read this. It's freely available online from the Aspen Institute. And one of these is my kid. You can guess which one. Thank you.
Whoa. Mary Helen, I thought I had a lot of energy and passion. I
care about this stuff. Come on, you guys. It's super duper important stuff you're doing. Yeah.
So I there's a virtual rebellion going on the back channel here. Like, forget translation groups. Let's just stay with Mary Helen. There are more questions here than we can actually digest. I did put in your recent article from ASCD in here, which is great. So I'm going to probably narrow it down to 3 questions, guys. For you, and we might go over a little if that's okay. But Jason in Colorado, who we know well, broached this question. Has the research allowed you to argue for the importance of culturally responsive curriculum and pedagogy in order to engage diverse student populations? Your work touches on what may be contributing to the achievement gap.
Absolutely.
Across the curriculum. I could keep reading the question.
I think I know where. What was his name? Jason?
Jason's in Colorado.
Where Jason's going. Jason in Colorado, right on. Exactly. This is the essence of what stereotype threat and identity, gender, all of it is about. Those are, in essence, stories people construct in their mind that reflect their perception, subjectively theirs, their interpretation of what their teacher or their world or the police think about them. That story is what's organizing all the information, because information is not just stored in little file drawers. It's integrated into big picture stories and understanding. So absolutely, this work directly argues for culturally responsive teaching. And I think really what we need to do as teachers, right, and I'm a teacher too, is empower our kids to show us their cultural ways of knowing. Design classroom spaces that they can own and co-construct with us as teachers, because then you're automatically doing what's culturally relevant, because they'll bring their whole authentic selves to the experience and they'll share with you the way they think about stuff. So cultural relevance isn't just about us as teachers saying, Oh, okay, I should have said at the beginning, I was a 7th grade teacher for several years before I went to grad school, right, in a public junior, senior high. But, being a teacher isn't just about the work all falling on me to give you what you need, students, right? That's exhausting and impossible. Being a teacher is more like being the orchestrator of a contract, of a space for people. You're building out opportunities and then introducing kids to those opportunities in ways they know how to use them well, because anything goes is not what I'm saying, right? You need to know how to deal with these opportunities in ways that are actually likely to help you discover what I wanted you to know about this disciplinary content and about what it feels like to think about that content and to really engage your full self in that exploratory process. People must feel culturally and socially and emotionally safe to do that. Why? The brain data explains it. If we need these default mode systems to be activated, to be able to kind of disengage and make a story that allows us to pull all the information together into a coherent understanding, we can't do that when we're watching out here what people think of us, what's going on. Is somebody going to smack us, right? Like either physically, I hope not, or emotionally or socially, right? If we're out there worrying about what's going on around us, we neurologically are not in a sort of position to disengage and make deep meaning. We're in a reaction position where we need to, respond as reactively as possible. That directly undermines, somebody says toxic stress, fight or flight. That's exactly right. That directly undermines our ability to learn. Why? Because it shapes those networks to focus out here. Over time, your brain grows into what you need it for. If you live in that kind of world, you end up shrinking the hippocampus, or not growing it, and instead growing amygdala, which is your sort of cognitive affective alarm system for saying, like, well, that looks dangerous. Well, watch it over there. Oops, there comes the, right? And all that stuff becomes hyperactive, and you can't move into a mode where you make emotionally relevant meaning about something that isn't directly in the here and now. Zoretta Hammond, yes. Read Zoretta Hammond.
I'm going to pick a Rachel Eversole. So a lot of, we have over 200, we have almost 300 people in the space. We go to conferences, whether in person or now virtual. I know we all heard things that validated why we're teachers and in education and the challenges we face. And a lot of people are going to want to run back to their colleagues and say, here's what I heard, here's what we should do. And I know David Daniel's going to talk a lot about this on Friday. What is where should we start? I mean, there's so many places we could start. We have so many colleagues who are not even close to being in this space.
I know, it's very, very, very difficult. Well, so here, first thing I would say, this is me, the idealist, right? Be visionary. My students gave me a mug that is unfortunately locked in my office on quarantine, but a mug that says, proceed as if success is inevitable, right? And do that. Start sticking yourself out there, start talking about this stuff, start engaging in these habits of mind, start having these conversations with your colleagues. And there are little activities that you can do that I think start you thinking in this way. For example, ask yourself, who are my students, each one? Think about each one and challenge yourself to think about, what does that child do better than me? What is that young person better at than me? What do they know more about than I do? If you can answer that question for every kid in your class, what do I admire about that child? That's a start, because already you're engaging with what are that child's dispositions and propensities, right? And knowing them. Another thing you can do is really start to engage your students in deeper project-oriented, interest-driven ways of learning. Now, this is difficult when you're being faced with standards and accountability measures that don't align with deep learning, right? That are about coverage at the expense of depth. And so I recognize that. We're going to need to keep on pushing against the administrators and the leaders to show them why this stuff really is what produces learning. and that in the long run, you actually know better because you can figure stuff out if you don't know it, as compared to if you forget it and all you learned it was as a fact or a procedure, you're done, right? You're host. If I don't know how to do algebra, I can go teach myself it again. I know how to do that, right? Whereas if I would just memorized it, then, it's gone if I lose it, right? So I think what you really need to do is start getting to know your kids, asking them what they're interested in, and also bringing in topics. I mean, this is the upside. This is the opportunity right now during this horrible pandemic and political situation and everything that's going on right now. The upside is people are really in a huff, right? There's a lot going on. There's a lot we're talking about. There's a lot politically, no matter which side you want to talk about. Pulling that together is heated and it's engaged. Focus, kids, on the stuff that really matters now. Let's go back and look at what did the Constitution actually say about this, right? Is this how we think about it now? What do you know what I mean? What is the science around virus transmission, right? What do we, you know what I mean? And so what would that suggest? And let's look at how scientists have discovered all these things over the past 3-4 months that we didn't know before. So they said, don't wear masks before. It doesn't really matter because they don't protect you. And now they realize, oh, but they protect you from hurting other people. We didn't think of that, right? Show the process with your kids. And the next thing I would do is design projects that actually promote kids using their skills for real in the world in age-appropriate ways. We need all hands on deck to get over this pandemic as a society. We can't sit back and wait for the world to reopen. We need our kids to be tutoring one another, tutoring the younger kids who don't know how to do it. I'm trying to set up a tutoring brigade. We've got a zillion college kids ready to start in the fall who can't go back to school. Let's enlist them as a brigade of teacher helpers. And you guys reach out and say, listen, could you work with these 3 kids on this assignment I've put together? And I'll be back on your Zoom in 45 minutes. Meanwhile, I'm going to talk with this kid who I think needs me more in a personal way right now. Let's make use of our resources, including our young people, in a really thoughtful way so that we all come together. Because not only will we be helping each other, like we're providing tutoring services, but we're also teaching the tutors what it means to be a helpful citizen who uses their skills for something other than just to serve their own ends, right? So we're teaching our young people social and civic lessons. We're helping our young people review their own stuff, right? Like, hey, if you have to teach how to write a good paragraph in 10th grade to a bunch of 5th graders, it's a nice review for you too. So we would be building capacity in the country at the same time as we're building dispositions. And as we build those kinds of relationships, we'll be in a safe space where we get to know each other and work together so that we can start to work through some of our differences and understand what directions do we want to go. How do our policies right now actually impact people beside myself, right? And how do I actually think about other people's perspectives who I maybe disagree with? Let's go there, right? That's what education is about. That's a huge lift for you. I am not saying this is easy work, okay? But you're up to it. You are up to it. Because why? Because you've decided to dedicate your professional life to the development of young people. Let's do it. Let's work together and do it.
All right. I don't know. I'm stopping there. I know I might get fired from this day job from this whole audience. I cannot thank you enough. One of my favorite poems or quotes from Renee Rilke, and I don't know if I said that right, I put into the chat. There are so many questions we're grappling with in this audience. I would, number one, everybody can rewatch this video. It is password protected. I know I'm going to do that later. I love the challenge and that you put forth for us. And I cannot thank you enough, Mary Helen, for finally joining us today. I think the translation groups that follow are going to work to try to unpack it. We wish we could take you into every translation group. There's only one of you, clearly. But thank you.
I need several of myself. I think that would be very helpful, although it would probably drive my teenage kids nuts, but
we get it. I cannot thank you enough. Team, everybody, we're going to break for about 15 minutes. So Translation groups will begin about 1:40. Let's say that. Give everybody a chance to stand up, stretch, and decompress. But thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in translation groups in a couple minutes.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate
Thanks, Mary
it.
Helen. Awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you drink any water during that presentation?
No. All right. Bye.
We'll share.